My name is Sue, and at 52 years old, I thought I knew exactly what my life would look like. 25 years of marriage to Frank, a beautiful home in the suburbs, two wonderful grown children. I spent 3 months planning our silver anniversary party. Everything had to be perfect. Lately, Frank had been distant, working late, always on his phone. But I brushed off my concerns. Tonight would bring back the spark, I was certain. Before I tell you what happened at our anniversary celebration, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever faced betrayal in love, because trust me, what I'm about to share might just give you the strength you need. Frank and I met at the county fair 27 years ago. I was 25 working at a local bakery, and he was 27 just starting his law career. It was one of those perfect summer evenings. The air smelled like cotton candy and possibility. Our eyes met across the crowd, and by the end of the night, he had my phone number scrawled on a napkin. We fell hard and fast. Within a year, we were standing at the altar promising forever. I still remember how handsome he looked that day, how his eyes welled up when I walked down the aisle. Everyone said we were the perfect couple. Our early years were a whirlwind of joy and plans. We bought our first house, a fixer-upper that we poured our hearts into. I can still smell the fresh paint and feel the satisfaction of making something ours. 3 years and our daughter Jennifer was born, followed by our son Michael 3 years later. Those were exhausting but magical days. Frank was ambitious, working long hours to build his law practice. I supported him every step of the way, putting my own career as a restaurant manager on hold to raise our children. When his first big case came in, I stayed up all night with him preparing. When he decided to open his own firm, I used my savings to help with the startup costs. We were partners in every sense. As the kids grew, we created traditions. Summer trips to the lake house, Sunday family dinners, movie nights, where we'd all pile onto the couch. Those memories are like photographs in my mind, moments of pure contentment. But something shifted as we approached our 25th year together. Frank started coming home later and later. Our conversations grew shorter. When I asked about his day, his answers became vague. He was always on his phone, stepping out of rooms to take calls. I told myself it was just work stress, that he was going through a midlife crisis perhaps. Jennifer noticed it too. "Mom, is everything okay with you and Dad?" she asked one evening while helping me with dishes. I forced a smile and assured her everything was fine. Why wouldn't it be? We had built this life together. I convinced myself that our relationship just needed a spark, something to remind us of the love we'd shared for so long. That's when I decided to throw a 25th anniversary party, something special to celebrate our journey and reignite what seemed to be fading. Planning our anniversary celebration became my mission. I wanted everything to be perfect, a testament to our 25 years together. I reserved the ballroom at the Riverside Hotel, the same place where we'd held our wedding reception all those years ago. It felt symbolic, returning to where our married life began. I spent weeks crafting the guest list, making sure to include everyone who had been important in our lives. 50 people in total. Close friends, family members, colleagues who had become friends. I tracked down Frank's college roommate who had moved to Australia. I invited my childhood best friend Laura, who I hadn't seen in person for 5 years. I wanted everyone who had witnessed our journey to be there. The cake was special too. 3 tiers with silver accents decorated with photos from throughout our marriage printed on edible paper. The top had a replica of our wedding cake topper. I worked with the bakery for weeks getting it just right. I arranged for a video montage of our life together, wedding footage, the children's births, vacations, holidays, everyday moments that made up the tapestry of our marriage. Looking through those old photos and videos, I felt a pang of nostalgia for the young, hopeful couple we once were. For Frank's gift, I saved for months to buy him the Rolex watch he had always admired but considered too extravagant. I wanted him to know he was worth every penny, that I still saw him as that ambitious young lawyer with dreams in his eyes. I bought a new dress, midnight blue with silver threading that caught the light when I moved. I scheduled appointments for hair, makeup, and nails. I wanted to look my best to remind Frank of the woman he fell in love with. Through all these preparations, Frank remained oddly detached. When I asked his opinion on the venue or the menu, he shrugged and said, "Whatever you think is best, Sue." When I mentioned the guest list, he barely glanced at it. 2 weeks before the party, he suggested postponing. "I have a big case coming up. The timing isn't great," he said, not meeting my eyes. "But we've already sent the invitations," I protested. "Everyone has made arrangements. The deposit for the venue is non-refundable." He sighed, relenting with obvious reluctance. "Fine, we'll go ahead with it." His lack of enthusiasm hurt, but I pushed the feeling aside. Once he was at the party, surrounded by friends and memories, he would remember what we had together. I was sure of it. In the weeks leading up to our anniversary party, Frank's behavior became increasingly strange. It was like living with a stranger who wore my husband's face. One Tuesday evening, his phone rang during dinner. He glanced at the screen, then quickly declined the call. "Who was that?" I asked casually. "Just work," he replied, but his ears turned red the way they always did when he wasn't being truthful. Later that night, I heard him in the home office speaking in hushed tones. "I can't talk now," he was saying. "I'll call you tomorrow." When he came back to bed, I pretended to be asleep. The next morning, while Frank was in the shower, his phone buzzed with a text message. I had never been the type to snoop, but something pulled me toward the device. The message preview showed only, "Missed you already. Last night was..." I put the phone down, heart pounding, unwilling to unlock it and see the rest. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe I was overreacting. Frank started coming home smelling different. A perfume that wasn't mine lingered on his shirts. When I did the laundry, I found long blonde hairs that couldn't have been from anyone in our family. I plucked them off silently, dropping them into the trash along with my growing suspicions. Jennifer noticed too. "Dad seems weird lately," she said during one of our Sunday calls. She had moved to Boston after college, but we spoke every week. "Is everything okay?" "He's just busy with work," I said automatically. "You know how he gets when he has a big case?" "If you say so, Mom," she replied, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. Frank suddenly became obsessed with his appearance. He joined a gym, bought new clothes, got a trendy haircut that looked slightly odd on a man in his 50s. He started using expensive cologne and whitening strips for his teeth. "Just trying to stay young," he said with a laugh when I commented on the changes. "Turning 55 next month has me thinking about taking better care of myself." That explanation made sense, so I clung to it. Frank was just having a midlife crisis. It would pass. We would be fine. Then came the phone call from Diane, a waitress at my restaurant. "Sue, I don't know if I should tell you this," she began hesitantly, "but I saw Frank at Bellini's last night with a woman. They looked close." Bellini's was an intimate Italian restaurant across town known for its romantic atmosphere. "It was probably a client," I said, though my stomach clenched. "Maybe," Diane conceded, but her tone said she didn't believe it. A week later, a woman called our home phone asking for Frank. When I said he wasn't available, she sounded confused. "Oh, I must have the wrong number," she said quickly and hung up. The final straw came when I found a receipt in his jacket pocket for a diamond pendant from Tiffany's, $2,300. My birthday had passed months ago, and Christmas was still far off. The pendant never appeared among my possessions. Still, I held on to hope. 25 years of marriage had to count for something. Whatever was happening, we could work through it. The anniversary party would remind him of everything we had built together. The morning of our anniversary party dawned bright and clear. I woke up early, too excited and nervous to sleep any longer. Frank's side of the bed was empty. He had left a note on the kitchen counter. "Had to go to the office. See you at the party." It stung that he couldn't take the whole day off for our anniversary, but I pushed the feeling aside. Tonight was going to be perfect. I wouldn't let anything ruin it. I spent the morning getting ready at a leisurely pace. Facial, manicure, hairstyling, makeup. The works. By the time I slipped into my new dress, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. Gone was the tired woman with worry lines between her brows. In her place stood someone elegant, hopeful, radiant. Jennifer arrived at the house early to help with the last-minute details. "Mom, you look stunning," she said, hugging me carefully to avoid wrinkling my dress. "Do you think your father will think so?" I asked, hating the insecurity in my voice. "He better," she replied with a pointed look. Jennifer had always been perceptive. I sometimes wondered how much she had guessed about the state of our marriage. Michael arrived next, handsome in his suit. "Where's Dad?" he asked, looking around. "He had to go to the office, but he'll meet us at the venue," I explained. Michael frowned slightly but said nothing. My best friend Laura arrived as we were about to leave. She had flown in from Chicago, especially for the party. "Sue, you're gorgeous," she said, but I noticed her eyes were worried. "Have you heard from Frank today?" "He had to work." I repeated the explanation, sounding hollow even to my ears. "He'll meet us there." Laura and I had been friends since high school. She knew me better than almost anyone. "Sue," she said softly, "are you sure everything's okay?" "Of course," I insisted brightly. "Why wouldn't it be 25 years of marriage? That's something to celebrate, right?" She squeezed my hand but said nothing more. We arrived at the venue an hour early to oversee the final setup. The ballroom looked magical. Twinkling lights, silver and blue decorations, photos of Frank and me throughout the years displayed on easels. The cake stood proudly on his table, a monument to our years together. Guests began arriving at 7. I greeted them warmly, accepting congratulations and well wishes, all while keeping one eye on the entrance. Frank had promised to be there by 7:30 at the latest. 7:30 came and went. Then 8, then 8:30. I kept up a brave face, but I could sense the concerned glances, the whispered conversations. My phone remained silent. No calls, no texts explaining his absence. "Should we start serving dinner?" the event coordinator asked discreetly at 8:45. "Let's wait just a bit longer," I said, my smile feeling frozen on my face. At 9, the main doors opened, and Frank finally walked in. He looked handsome in his new suit, his hair perfectly styled. But his eyes were guarded, and when he kissed my cheek in greeting, it felt like the touch of a stranger. "Sorry I'm late," he mumbled. "Work thing ran long." Relief flooded through me. He was here. Everything would be fine now. "It's okay," I said warmly. "You're here now. That's what matters." Throughout dinner, Frank was distant. He spoke enthusiastically with our guests, but barely looked at me. He drank one glass of scotch after another, something he rarely did. I noticed him checking his phone repeatedly under the table, typing quick responses with a slight smile on his lips. Laura caught my eye from across the table, her expression asking a silent question. I gave her a reassuring smile I didn't feel. Not tonight. I wouldn't let anything spoil tonight. After dinner came the moment I had been both anticipating and dreading. The speeches followed by cutting our anniversary cake. This was the moment when Frank would remember, when he would look at me the way he used to, when everything would be right again. The MC, our friend Jack, called for everyone's attention. "And now, before we cut this beautiful cake, a few words from the man of the hour. Frank, would you like to say something about your 25 incredible years with Sue?" The room quieted. Frank stood, taking the microphone, his movements slightly unsteady from the scotch. He cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. My heart pounded as I waited for his words. "Thank you all for coming tonight." He began, his voice formal, as if addressing a jury. 25 years is a long time." He paused, taking another sip of his drink. The silence stretched uncomfortably. "Sue and I have had many good years together," he continued, still not looking at me. "We've raised 2 wonderful children. We've built a life." I felt my smile faltering. This wasn't the warm, loving speech I had imagined. Suddenly, the doors to the ballroom opened. Every head turned. A young woman stood there, tall, blonde, striking in a fitted red dress. She couldn't have been more than 32. She hesitated at the doorway, then stepped inside. Frank stopped mid-sentence. When I looked back at him, I saw his face transform. The distant, formal expression melted away, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine joy, excitement, love. My stomach dropped. I knew instantly who she was, what she represented. Frank straightened his shoulders, suddenly looking more confident. Actually, I have an important announcement to make. The room grew so quiet you could hear the ice shifting in the water glasses. Sue and I have had 25 wonderful years. Frank said, his voice stronger now. But life moves on. People change. I've changed. He gestured toward the blonde woman who was now walking toward us. I'd like to introduce Natalie Phillips. Natalie is the woman I'm in love with. Gasps echoed around the room. I felt as though I had been plunged into ice water. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. Natalie reached Frank's side, and he put his arm around her waist. She smiled uncertainly at the shocked faces staring back at her. Natalie and I met 8 months ago at a conference in Chicago, Frank continued. She's a legal consultant, brilliant at what she does. We've been together since then, and it's time to stop hiding. He turned to look at me directly for the first time that evening. Sue, I filed for divorce last week. My lawyer will be contacting you. I'm sorry to do this here, but I thought it was best to be honest with everyone at once. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt 50 pairs of eyes on me waiting for my reaction. The humiliation was so complete, I thought I might dissolve into the floor. Jennifer was the first to react. She stood so quickly, her chair toppled backward. Are you kidding me right now? She shouted at her father, her voice shaking with fury. You bring your mistress to your anniversary party. What is wrong with you? Michael remained seated, but his hands were clenched into fists, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Dad, he said, his voice low and dangerous, you need to leave now. I was aware of Laura moving to stand behind me, her hand on my shoulder. I could feel the pity radiating from our guests, hear the shocked murmurs beginning to ripple through the crowd. Frank looked uncomfortable now, as if he hadn't anticipated quite this level of backlash. Natalie shifted nervously at his side, clearly regretting her grand entrance. I think we should go, she whispered to Frank, tugging at his arm. No, Frank said, suddenly stubborn. I have every right to be here. I paid for half of this party. His words cut through my shock. Paid for half? I had used my own savings for most of it, not wanting to argue with him about the expense. That small lie, on top of everything else, was what finally broke through my paralysis. For several seconds, I couldn't move. My body felt weighted down, my lungs struggling for air. The room seemed to spin around me as 25 years of memories collided with this new horrifying reality. My husband had just publicly humiliated me in front of everyone we knew and loved. He had brought his mistress to our anniversary party. He had filed for divorce without even telling me first. Every eye in the room was on me. I could see the pity, the shock, the morbid curiosity. They were all waiting to see if I would break down, scream, throw things. The old Sue might have done just that. But as I stood there, something shifted inside me. A strange calm washed over me. This moment, as terrible as it was, would not define me. Frank would not take this night from me, too. I straightened my spine, lifted my chin, and walked toward my husband and his mistress. Frank took a step back, clearly expecting an explosion. Instead, I gently took the microphone from his hand. Thank you, Frank, for that illuminating announcement. I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. As it happens, I have an announcement too. I smiled at our guests, then back at Frank, whose expression had shifted from defiance to wariness. First, I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. This evening has certainly taken an unexpected turn, but I appreciate each of you being here to witness everything. I took a deep breath before continuing. Frank, I've known about Natalie for over a month now. His eyes widened with surprise. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the late nights, the secret phone calls, the receipts for gifts I never received? I shook my head. I've been married to you for 25 years. I know you better than you know yourself. I turned to address our guests. What Frank doesn't know is that after finding lipstick on his collar, that definitely wasn't mine. How cliché, by the way. I hired a private investigator. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Frank's face paled. The investigator documented everything. The hotel meetups, the dinners, the weekend trips. But more interestingly, he discovered something I didn't expect. Frank has been using company funds to finance his new relationship. The jewelry, the vacations, even paying for Natalie's apartment, all done through creative accounting at the firm. Frank's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Natalie stepped away from him slightly, her confident smile faltering. After getting this information, I consulted with Patricia Winters. I gestured to a sharp-looking woman in a gray suit who stood near the back. For those who don't know her, Patricia is the top divorce attorney in the state. She's been preparing my case for weeks now. I saw several of Frank's colleagues exchange alarmed glances. Patricia's reputation was legendary. What Frank seems to have forgotten is that I own 40% of his law firm. I was his first investor when he started the practice. My name may not be on the door, but it's certainly on the founding documents. Frank's face had gone from pale to gray. This was clearly information he hadn't shared with Natalie, whose expression was growing increasingly concerned. Patricia has already filed a petition for emergency injunctive relief to prevent Frank from making any further financial decisions at the firm, pending our divorce. We've also submitted documentation to the IRS regarding some concerning financial irregularities we discovered during our review. I nodded toward a serious-looking man sitting quietly at a corner table. That's Martin Russo, by the way. He's with the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS. He was very interested in the documentation we provided about undeclared income and questionable deductions. Frank swayed slightly, reaching for the table to steady himself. The Scotch glass in his hand slipped, shattering on the floor. No one moved to clean it up. And finally, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. I'd like to acknowledge Thomas and Richard, Frank's partners at the firm. Two men in expensive suits nodded uncomfortably from their table. They've been conducting their own internal investigation into missing client funds for the past 2 weeks. Tonight's party provided an excellent opportunity for us all to be in the same room together. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Thomas stood up. Frank, we need to talk. Now. Frank looked desperately from Thomas to me to Natalie, who was already backing toward the door. I think I should go. She stammered, her confident demeanor completely evaporated. That might be best, I agreed pleasantly. Though the federal investigators might have some questions for you later about those expenses Frank charged to client accounts. As Natalie hurried out, I turned back to our stunned guests. I want to thank you all for coming tonight. While this isn't quite the celebration I had planned, it is in its own way a milestone worth marking. I raised my champagne glass. To new beginnings, to truth, to self-respect. The party will continue, but I understand if some of you need to leave, especially those with subpoenas to prepare. As Frank was led away by his increasingly angry partners, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The fear and humiliation were still there, but now something else was emerging. Strength, certainty, even a strange sense of freedom. Jennifer and Michael rushed to my side, both talking at once, expressing outrage and support. I hugged them tightly, grateful for their love. Mom, that was incredible, Jennifer whispered. I had no idea you were so badass, Michael added with newfound respect. Laura appeared with a fresh glass of champagne. To Sue, she said, clinking her glass against mine. The strongest woman I know. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like myself again. Not Frank's wife, not the victim of his betrayal, but Sue. Just Sue. And that was more than enough. The aftermath of that night unfolded like scenes from a movie I never expected to star in. Frank left our house the next day, taking only clothes and personal items. He moved into a hotel, not Natalie's apartment. As it turned out, She disappeared completely after learning about the financial investigations. Young love apparently couldn't withstand the prospect of being implicated in fraud. The divorce proceedings took 6 months to finalize. Frank fought at first, trying to claim I had set him up, that the financial irregularities were misunderstandings. But the evidence was overwhelming. In the end, his partners offered him a deal: resign from the firm, cooperate fully with the IRS investigation, and they wouldn't press criminal charges for the misappropriated client funds. The divorce settlement gave me our house, half of our savings, and a substantial portion of Frank's remaining assets. The judge was not sympathetic to a man who had used company money to fund his affair. The IRS was less forgiving. Frank ended up paying significant penalties and back taxes. Those first weeks alone in our house, now my house, were strange. After 25 years of marriage, the silence was both deafening and liberating. I would wake up in the middle of the night, momentarily confused by the empty space beside me, then remember everything and feel a complex mixture of grief and relief. Jennifer and Michael were my rocks. They called daily, visited often. Jennifer even stayed with me for 2 weeks, working remotely from my dining room table. "I'm not checking on you, Mom," she insisted. "I just miss you." But I saw the concern in her eyes, the watchfulness. Slowly, I began rebuilding. I started with small changes, repainting the master bedroom in colors Frank had always vetoed, rearranging furniture to better suit just me. Then came bigger steps. I used part of the settlement money to open a small cafe near downtown. I had always loved the restaurant business, but had set aside my own ambitions to support Frank's career. Now it was my turn. The cafe, which I named New Chapter, became my therapy. I threw myself into creating menus, hiring staff, designing the space. Jennifer helped with social media marketing, and Michael, who had inherited his father's head for business without the ethical failings, assisted with the financial planning. 6 months after opening New Chapter, was featured in the local newspaper as one of the best new brunch spots in town. The article included a photo of me standing proudly in front of the cafe. I sent a copy to Frank with no note attached. He never responded. I heard through mutual friends that he was struggling. His professional reputation was in tatters. He had taken a position at a much smaller firm in a neighboring town with a significant pay cut. Natalie was long gone, apparently already involved with another, older, successful man. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a dull sadness for what might have been. Laura convinced me to join a support group for divorced women. There I found community with others who understood the unique pain of a long marriage ending. We shared stories, advice, tears, and eventually laughter. These women became a new kind of family for me. At one of our group meetings, I met Eleanor, whose husband had left her for his secretary after 30 years of marriage. "The best revenge," she told me, "is to live well, really well, better than you ever did with him." I took her words to heart. I started traveling, small trips at first, then more adventurous ones. I went to cooking classes in Italy, hiked in Colorado, took a writing workshop in Maine. I filled my passport with stamps and my camera with the memories that belonged solely to me. One day, about a year after the divorce, I received an email from Alan Peterson. Alan had been a friend from college who attended our anniversary party. He was divorced himself, had moved back to town recently, and wondered if I might like to grab coffee sometime. I surprised myself by saying yes. Coffee led to dinner to more dinners. Alan was kind, funny, and respectful of my boundaries. He understood that I was still healing, still discovering who I was outside of my marriage. We took things slowly, building a friendship first that gradually evolved into something more. When Jennifer asked if Alan was my boyfriend, I laughed at the teenage term. "He's a companion," I told her. "Someone who makes me smile." That seemed enough for now. As for Frank, I saw him occasionally at large community events or when there were matters related to our children that required both our presence. We were cordial but distant. The hurt had faded to a dull ache that only occasionally flared up, usually when I least expected it. One afternoon, Frank came to new chapter. He sat alone at a corner table, ordered coffee and pie, and waited until the lunch rush was over. Then he asked if I had a minute to talk. I owe you an apology, he said, looking older than his years. What I did, how I did it, was unforgivable. I studied his face, searching for the man I had loved for so many years. He was still there somewhere beneath the lines of stress and regret. Thank you for saying that, I replied simply. Are you happy, Sue? He asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. I considered the question carefully. I'm finding my way to happiness, I answered truthfully. It looks different than I expected, but yes, I think I am. He nodded, paid his bill, and left. I watched him go, feeling neither triumph nor bitterness, just peace. The greatest lesson from this chapter of my life wasn't about betrayal or revenge. It was about resilience, about discovering that even after decades of defining myself as half of a pear, I was whole on my own, complete, sufficient. I learned that forgiveness isn't always about the other person. Sometimes it's a gift you give yourself, permission to let go of anger that only weighs you down, to release expectations of what your life should have been. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to begin again. At 52, I had thought my story was largely written. Instead, I discovered it was just taking an unexpected turn into territory that was frightening but also exhilarating. Life rarely gives us what we expect. Sometimes it gives us less, sometimes infinitely more. The beauty lies not in trying to control the uncontrollable, but in finding the courage to embrace what comes next with an open heart. If you're facing your own moment of truth, your own unexpected chapter, remember this: you are stronger than you know. The end of one story is merely the beginning of another. And sometimes the most beautiful blossoms grow from the most difficult seasons of life, not because we are lucky, but because we are brave enough to choose our own happiness. I would love to hear your stories of resilience in the comments below. Have you ever had to start over? What gave you the strength to move forward? Please like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too can rise from the ashes of betrayal. Thank you for listening, and remember, your best chapter may still be waiting to be written.